I have several questions, but I'm just going to ask this one for starters. For Wes, recently there was a rally in Auburn for, I guess it was the vertical drilling they were taking. At first I thought it was also the horizontal, but I think it was the vertical drilling. And people in Auburn are trying to get Auburn to stop accepting this waste. One of the things that struck me is that later on after the rally, people went inside and spoke before the mayor and their common council. And what was lacking is someone with expertise about the plant, whether the plant gets affected if it would take this kind of waste. And as a strategic kind of, viewing it strategically, I thought here was a great opportunity to speak before a city or a small city or a town, and not having an expert there to weigh about what's happening. And so I was thinking in terms of how we turn the corner as opposed to just having a rally and speaking to the same people all the time. That was a golden moment. Now, Walter Hang was at the rally, and he says the waste treatment plant should not be accepting this kind of waste. But the critical moment was being inside and speaking in front of the mayor and council.
Let me just talk first about recruiting experts like me. There are a lot of young or recently retired experts that you should reach out to and try to get pro bono help. I'm working with a group of attorneys in Colorado where we have sort of a half price kind of, we call it low bono type of work. That's when we get paid by some wealthy client. But I do a lot of pro bono work, this type of work. So there's a lot of experts. Reach out for the expertise. With respect to the sewage treatment plant, I didn't know until the New York Times article just how pervasive the issue was with respect to radioactive material coming back from the shale. I mentioned in my topic that most shales contain these radioactive nuclides because of the way the decomposition of the original radioactivity that created the plate tectonics that made the shale in the first place. So the fracking fluids contain some component of radioactive material. It's inert with respect to the sewage treatment plant. It won't be treated. It ends up in the solid waste. It ends up principally in the sludge. So wherever the sludge is going, whether it's a landfill or land farm, which would be a bigger risk, needs to be analyzed. For the most part, the volatile organic compounds that come back in the produced water will be handled by the sewage treatment plant. Because especially, now it depends on that plant and how quickly they bleed it in. They have to slowly bleed it in so it doesn't become a dominant part of the effluent. Another problem that this brings up is just how the salts go through. Sewage plants don't treat salts. Whatever the salt content is of this wastewater is just added to the effluent. The first time EPA really responded to this issue is when it got a call from the Coca-Cola bottling company on the Monongahela River. So here was one industry calling EPA that another industry is harming us. So we pay a little more attention to that, perhaps. But so it's a technical issue. You need to recruit expertise. It's a serious problem. As you know, EPA has directed the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection to respond to it about how widespread this article, and we've asked on a voluntary basis for it to cease. There's not a good relationship between the Pennsylvania governor and the Obama administration on this issue. It's a contentious issue. Has not yet been resolved. I don't know where it's headed. I was surprised to learn in this trip that some of the produced water is coming here. Some of the Pennsylvania produced water and frack water is coming up here for the same type of thing. In Auburn, that's what you're talking about, and then we were down in Binghamton last night. A similar thing has happened. So, one, recruit experts. Get them to work for nothing. There are plenty of us retired and still thinking people. We're around. And two, it's a serious problem. It should be stopped. Let me tell you why the industry is so focused on that. They have no way of getting rid of, or very little opportunities to get rid of their produced water here. Remember I talked about you don't want to put it back where you got it. So they got to get rid of it. But your formations here in the Marcellus and this series of quite old Devonian shales aren't loose enough to take waste disposal. They'd have to be fracked in order to do that. So they don't do it the way we do it out west, principally by injection. You heard Jeff talking about the one suitable one up near. Where was the injection proposal?
In Pulteney.
In Pulteney. Well, I mean, because they were headed there because it was a looser sand there, it made it possible. And out west, we evaporated a lot, and then so it's a big issue, a fundamental issue. And you might have seen an MIT report that came out a month ago, and it flagged this issue as the industry's got to get on top of its produced water management.
We did have the DEC intervene in Cortland, where someone brought it to the city wastewater treatment plant, and they stopped it in Cortland.
In Cortland, they did.
Yes.
We could find it also.
Also, produced water from Pennsylvania.
I'm not sure where it was coming from in Cortland. There it is.
All could have been produced water from the vertical crack.
Sarah?
I have a question about the Duke study and the methane in the drinking water that they found. And I looked at the graph that showed the levels were sometimes higher or lower. You know, there was a graph that put the distance from the well on one axis and the level of methane on the other axis, and that's how they could see this sharp effect. But I've also heard that there's no toxicity for methane in dissolved in water because it just comes up to the surface, it evaporates, I mean not evaporates, it's released. So it's not harmful to drink. So could you talk about that?
Methane is highly volatile. It's just the CH4 molecule, so it has a real low partial pressure. It evaporates from the water. It won't stay dissolved in water unless it's in a tank. From a municipal treatment point of view, any type of methane coming into a system that's also in a reservoir for any time of period, it doesn't contain methane. Where we see the problem with methane is because it shows up in domestic wells, and they're putting it into a pressure tank. You know, it's pressurized. So that's where it's a problem. I was talking last night to a woman in Binghamton about, I didn't know whether or not there were studies on toxicity itself if you ingested it. And she said that the Duke University report contains that they had looked for toxicological analysis of methane in water, and apparently that's missing from the scientific literature. Let me make this point generally about that. When I first had a list of 600 chemicals that came out from Dr. Theo Colburn with respect to chemicals used in the fracking fluids, of course I'm an engineer, I'm not an organic chemist, and I talked to a colleague of mine, a toxicologist, who worked for the Center for Disease Control, and he looked at that over the weekend, and he came back and reported that fully 2/3 of those chemicals on the list that were being used have not been analyzed in the science. So methane happens to be one of them. Because of this unusual. Pardon?
Have not been analyzed work?
Not been analyzed with respect to toxicity.
Oh.
There's 30,000 chemicals being used industrially in the United States, and there's not all of them have been tested. You know, we lack the kind of precautionary principle that Europe uses. So these chemicals go into the system, and then it's up to the citizens and the government to prove if they're toxic.
Yeah, I have a question. Why, you said that they're not disclosing the chemicals that are used in fracking. Industry says, no, we are. And we're right on the website, and there's a big list this long. What's the deal? How do you counteract that?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, the industry hasn't earned my trust, so I'm not going to count on a voluntary system. End of story, sort of. But they didn't come out with the frack focus until 6 weeks ago. I mean, it's only because of citizen pressure that it's mounted to do that. In my state of Colorado, the way this emerged in terms of disclosure, nothing was happening until a nurse in Durango went down. That is, she had renal failure after doing triage on a patient who came in from the oil and gas field. And she was exposed to chemicals on his clothing. So during his prep, she was exposed. The following week, she goes into renal failure. Her private medical physician calls the operator who's working on the drilling rig to find out what chemicals were used in order to treat. He was denied that information. So that created enough interest in Colorado, that kind of obvious problem, that Colorado has a requirement you got to disclose it to a doctor, but only if the doctor signs an agreement to keep it secret. Wyoming's starting to report, but even they allow some exemptions for proprietary chemicals. Arkansas has a new rule. Texas just passed a rule a week ago.
And this is sort of a common industry trick that we see. First, they won't tell you anything, and then they dump a truckload of material on you so that you can't find what you need to find in there. So that what you need to know if you have a well near you is what chemicals are going into that well. If they give you 600 chemicals and they're only using 50 of them in that frac, you can't test your well for 600 chemicals because no one could afford that. So it's
That's
really
right. That's right.
another level of obfuscation. And so what every citizen ought to know is what's going into that well 200 feet from their house. That's just minimal.
Wyoming is attempting to move in that way. It requires the analysis of chemicals at the point of injection. So you can go online in a Wyoming database and see it. But as I say, even some of that includes a proprietary exemption.
I don't quite agree with you that if you put these fracking fluid in a water treatment facility, all the radioactivity is going to be in the sludge and there's not going to be nothing in the water. That's not true. A lot of these radioactive salts are water soluble, so they're going to stay in the water. There is no process that you can use where you're going to selectively remove the radioactivity. And there is also a plan to reuse, to recycle these fracking fluid because they need such a volume that they plan to take the liquid out and reuse it in the next well or for the next fracking. And as they do that, they're going to increase the level of radioactivity, each time. And they're going to have such a concentration of radioactivity that, if you put that in any water recycling facilities, or treatment facility, they're going to have radioactivity coming out in the water. That was just a remark. A question that I have is, you hear about all these people living close to wells, having all these health issues. What about the people who are working there? How come are they not all dropping dead?
Let me make the introduction and go to you, Rick.
Okay, thank you.
I didn't understand that, and Dr. Colburn started talking about it as the missing cohort. We lack information on the workers.
Mm-hmm.
A big reason is the workers cannot call 911. The workers do not go through the community medical system. Workers are confined by their contract to call the EMT owned by the company, working for the company. You understand what I'm saying? So this is an industry that's captured its workers, and other than losing a limb or being deceased on the well field, where it would be criminal not to report, but with respect to exposure to toxic chemicals, they call the company EMT. It's not reported in any database. Dr. Colburn and I have been trying to motivate OSHA to get out and get on top of this. But we're missing that cohort. We think there's a serious contamination going on by the workers.
That would make no sense that they're not.
Certainly.
Subject, yeah.
But we're not getting it reported.
This is probably the most dangerous industry for workers. We know of workers being burned and killed routinely in Pennsylvania and West Virginia. If you start collecting that information, it's a very dangerous place, and I don't think OSHA has any jurisdiction on that.
How come?
They should have.
How
It
do
also
they
should
get
be
away
mentioned.
from that?
Is that right? No,
Mine
it
health
doesn't
and
have
safety.
jurisdiction. Go ahead.
It should also be covered under mine health and safety through OSHA, not just OSHA, but MESHA, which is mine health and safety, because it is mining minerals is what they consider drilling. Now, I worked in the industry in the late 70s, early 80s. Now, at one time, we had drilled an oil hole. We had hit straight paraffin oil. There's a lens in Colorado that covers about 500 square miles, but it's only 4 to 5 foot deep. You've got to be real good to hit it and not go through it and not ever know you hit it. We hit it and filled a frac tank in less than 19 hours off a direct siphon from 6,000 feet deep, no pump. Okay, we pulled a tool through it called a swab, which is just a series of leather cups. You yank it up, pull it to the surface as fast as you can, put a cap on it, on a valve to the tank. Now, while we were filling that frac tank, myself and one of the drillers went out to measure the tanks. You got to keep a close eye on it so you can close the valve, because we didn't do any spills back then. It wasn't allowed. You'd get in serious trouble for that. We go out to measure the tank, and you use a plumb bob on what surveyors used to call a chain. It's a metal tape measure. Okay, he goes to drop it down into the tank, 10 seconds. He's out cold in the tank. Fell in the tank. Okay, there's 17 chemicals in paraffin oil that will kill you. Okay, I was there, lucky for him, pulled him out of the tank, at which time he slid off the tank. It was in the middle of January, so it's real icy. I caught him before he hit the valve body on the other end, so it didn't break him in little pieces. We took him up to the doghouse, couldn't call an EMT or an ambulance, we were not allowed to. Take him up to the doghouse, set him up in the driller's doghouse. That's a doghouse, that's what they call the room up on the drilling platform. And we set him there and keep giving him smelling salts. After 3 hours, he knew who he was, but he didn't know where he was. He didn't know what he was doing there. And it's really hard to keep him in that doghouse and calm, and you have to do that because you can't let him get in the car because he'll kill everybody because he still can't walk. Okay, now as far as other workers getting sick, when they hire a water hauler, I don't know about here, but out in Colorado, the driver is told he's hauling water. Now, when he gets to the location, he'll haul the water, and then the first day or two on the job, he'll ask his employer, you told us we were hauling water. Yeah, and he said, well, why is the water black? And they'll tell him, oh, there's a little carbon in it. Don't worry about it. Now later, and I've got a good friend over in Garfield County, truck driver. For 6-7 years now, they told him he had the gout. Because swell up, joints get stiff, walks all bent over. Every time he got a little further and further bent over, they'd say, well, the arthritis is getting worse and worse. Right? 2 years ago, he ended up on oxygen, 1.5 years, 2 years ago, on oxygen all the time. They couldn't figure out why. Nothing really wrong with his lungs. Turns out it's nerve damage. That nerve damage is, from the chemicals in the tank. They finally linked it to overexposure to produced water. Now, when these drivers go up to a tank in big black letters, about 6 inches tall, they stencil in black paint produced water. Okay, now that's usually all the driver looks at. Over on one side of it will be a sign that says produced water. Contains H2S in headspace of tank, tank car, and tank. H2S is a scary thing. Highly toxic. At a certain part per million, I was H2S certified the first time in 75 and then again in 83. And I can't remember the exact parts, but I think it's 10 parts per million, not billion. Nowadays they measure it by billion. The alarms go off on the rig at 10 parts per million. Okay, now on the rigs for the roughnecks, they have H2S protection. On the corner of the rig near the beaver slide, and I'm sorry, I don't want to get too technical, beaver slide's how they pull the pipe up on the drilling platform. There'll be a vertical orange tank. Okay, that's H2S protection for the crew, not the local residents. When the alarms go off, everybody grabs a 30-minute pack, oxygen pack, and runs like hell. At least 500 feet away from the rig, they'll have what they call a safety zone, an oxygen concentrator. When you get there, first thing you do, count heads. If everybody's there, okay. Now we'll try to kill that gas. In other words, they increase the viscosity of the mud and the weight of the mud. Go back in under oxygen. They work under oxygen with backpacks, 30-minute backpacks. You go in and out, 2 at a time, mixing mud until you get and continue to run in your pump because you picked up off bottom and circulate. You're not drilling anymore. Okay, and you increase the weight and viscosity and kill that gas. Okay, and then that well's completed because you're in the zone. That's what we used to call it, was the zone. It's like football, the end zone. When you hit the bottom, you're TD. You've touched down. You usually got a bonus for that TD. Okay, but the deal is, it's highly dangerous, and they don't tell even the workers what they're actually working on. There's a lot of drivers that are sick, but most medical doctors don't do a chemical analysis or toxic tests on the blood or urine or anything else. Now, in Colorado, they say they do toxicity tests. They have toxicity labs. I think there's 4 of them just in Rifle, and that's a little bitty town. But they test for drugs and alcohol because they want the hand safe. Now, the other tag on the tank will say condensate. Contains benzene. Causes nerve damage, dizziness, headaches, and death. But you know,
So it's a carcinogen.
it's just got a little carbon in it. It's only water.
Trust.
There's a frac tank on a spill.
I mean, it's a known carcinogen.
Right. I've got a frac tank spill on my property from a frac operation. When they were filling the tanks, they dumped 400 barrels of frac fluid. They came in and told me they cleaned it up. What they did was slough 2 foot of dirt over the top of it. In 2008, I had to move, this happened in 2005. In 2008, they had to redo the contours because I couldn't get my irrigation water over that hump they left in the ground in their interim reclaim. When they come move that 2 foot of soil, there's a big black stain on the ground again. Now, just 3 weeks ago, I finally got our regulatory commission to come up and do soil samples, 6 inches deep. There was a spill last year right there in town in Rifle. It went 22 foot deep in 2 days. That was one tanker, 120 barrels. This spill was 400 barrels. I finally got the spill report 2 weeks ago. In that spill report, one page says 400 barrels on the ground, they retrieved 120. On the next page is another spill report. It says they dumped 400 barrels, they retrieved 320. They only had 2 hydrovacs there that only carry about 50 barrels in each one. Where'd they put that other 250 barrels of frac fluid to haul it off the place? Well, then in the report it says nearest groundwater or surface water, 500 feet. My lower reservoir was 250 feet away. I found the leak because the reservoir got full. It's time to start irrigating the lower 20. I go to open it, got a drain valve and a frac tank leaking out across my place and going a quarter mile through the property through a wetlands, a riparian area at the lower end of that pond, and where the 20 acres to the side and the 40 acres before it, the wastewater comes around that pad and into that riparian area and then down through that draw. In the report it said 500 feet to the water, 250 to that pond, 300 to the creek. It went all the way through the wetlands. Where it says wetlands, it says NA, not applicable. Because the oil company figures the wetlands must be by the river. I'm 10 miles from the river. But creek's a wetland, pond's a wetland. That riparian area for that quarter mile through the property is a wetland. But see, they take good care of you. They're such nice people. They do things in a responsible manner. Remember that at all times.
How frequent were the hydrogen sulfide releases that you described? Are they common?
I have gas coming off wells all the time.
When you were working.
When I was working?
Yeah, you said
We
the
didn't.
gas.
You mean the alarm going off?
Yeah, the alarm going off. You had to rush off, and then you had to.
I was never on a hole where the alarm went off.
So it doesn't happen.
Where we were drilling, it didn't at that time. But those holes weren't listed as HUS holes. Every hole in Garfield County is considered an HUS hole. All the tanks were marked HUS and headspace of, like I said, tank, tanker, and tank car. Now when I say tank car, all of the tank cars were the tankers. Tankers is a bobtail truck, carries 80 barrels. Tankers transport 120 barrels. At the front of the tank, near the top, there'll be 1.5 inch pipe coming out with a valve about anywhere from 8 inches to a foot long. That's pressure release, so the tank doesn't pressure up. While they're driving down the road, hauling that water to another pit or another tank, or they're getting in a real bad habit of setting up their own separators and separating the paraffin out of it, more or less. Once they leave the location, it's a waste product. So then they're taking the oil and they're not paying the royalty owners for that oil that they separate. But while they're traveling down the road, they're releasing H2S everywhere they go. So, you know, and you don't have an alarm in your car to tell you it's H2S as they drive by. So you don't know if you're getting exposed to too much or too little.
We're going to take one more question, but before we do, I just want to encourage you to make a donation. There's a big pail here for our speakers. And also, if you want more information about the EPIC event on Saturday, the 25th, you can leave your email address and I'll get the information to you. We did have some questions about parking, and that's all on the EPIC website about what to do with regard to parking on the campus.
If you go to allfrackedup.com, hit the EPIC page, scroll down a little bit, and then it's
Yeah, the information on directions, which you guys won't need, but the directions and the parking information.
And last point, GDAC has a meeting July 10th at the Beard Building at 5 p.m. on 9 Main Street in Cortland. So we encourage you to attend and help us figure out what other kinds of programs we're going to have. I talked to you about the one on the aquifer. We also have a vet coming who's doing research on animals sometime in September, but we do need your input. We need your questions so we can begin to address them with the appropriate experts. So one more question, John.
The experience in Garfield County is just tragic. I mean, it's really eye-opening. But could you tell us what was going on there? What kind of drilling was it? You said it was coal bed methane. Was it horizontal? Was it high volume hydrofracking? What's similar and different from what's happening in New York, and what are the real lessons that we need to?
I think that question would be well answered by someone with more expert information on the technical
holes in our area.
aspect of
You want to do that?
Yeah, let me try to do it kind of quick. They're after Mesa Verde and
Williamsport.
This is a vertical, tight sand. It's quite different. They do 10-acre downhole spacing, but it's vertical fracking in tight sand. So the geologic settings is completely different.
The same chemicals, the same sort of...
No, it's not high volume, not as high volume. It's not as slick water. It's more acidic, and the formations are just longer in depth. And so the industry's chosen in that situation to do tight spacing, just 10-acre spacing. That is up to 64 wells per section. That's the downhole spacing. They'll do multiple wells per pad, but downhole, it's that tight. We've gradually moved in Colorado from 160 to 40 to 10-acre spacing for this issue that they're trying to get more. It's certainly cheaper for them on the initial capital cost to remain vertical. So it is a significant difference.
But all of this is relevant to our concern here.
Well, it's relevant in terms of an unregulated, poorly regulated industry. I use the term as sort of the 19th century. It's time to bring them into the 21st century. And this problem of not having a federal oversight or a county that wants to push them to better technique lets the industry, confine its lobbying and contact just to one state entity. In my state of Colorado, the average inspection per well is 10 minutes. When we average it over. So this is an activity that's happening in the woods, so to speak, and it's not like having even a restaurant or industrial facility in town where, it's common practice. So that's...
Who's doing the inspection?
There's a state regulatory body, Colorado. It's called the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, similar to your DEC, DEP.
And what are they inspecting?
They're inspecting they do approve these well permits and their design and how they're constructed to prevent groundwater contamination. And so they're inspecting that the application to drill permit is that it's done in the way that the permit was issued.
One of the things that I want to say is when you talk to experts, whether or not you're talking to a medical doctor, who kind of specializes in this area of people exposed to the toxins around the gas fields, and also when you talk to some of the attorneys who handle these cases, they do say that, although the different types of drilling, technically like Wes described, might, be different, the areas of the country, and I would stretch that to say the world, that are around these types of activities will have clusters with individuals with similar symptoms. So, it's perhaps a little bit different in one area, but nonetheless, some of the classic symptoms, like, that we've already mentioned, will show up in pockets, and they're more concentrated in areas around drilling.
Let me mention just one thing about how difficult it is. Remember I mentioned the liability exemption under CERCLA? Well, let me go through one case and how that comes out. EPA investigators out of Denver are working on a contamination in a small town of Pavilion, Wyoming. And in that location, they found in 10 domestic wells this product 2BE that Tara mentioned, 2-butoxyethanol. And it's a common ingredient in fracking fluid. So our experts were were indicating that perhaps it got there from fracking or from a leaky pit. So when that case advances to the point of the Department of Justice and EPA attorneys meeting with the company attorneys, this information comes out in pretrial disclosure. And the attorneys for the company say, not so fast, federal government. We don't think that the 2BE has arrived there by the way you suggest. Instead, it could well have been as a consequence of these homeowners, the individual homeowner, pulling their well and degreasing their well with product 409, which contains 2BE. So catch that. Now, it's kind of silly, okay, but for our attorneys, and it's silly in terms of we have a target, we have a better understanding of what might be happening, but it still represents a significant problem for the U.S. government to go into a federal court and prove dispositively a party responsible because of this exemption. So the industry has lots of cards to play that they're not at fault, and this is one of them. The ubiquitous use of chemicals in the United States makes it not dispositive that when we find a contaminant that the industry did it.
Well, that's why every frac should have a marker so that it's very clear.
That's right. These frackers do not have a marker. Every fracker could have a marker. After the Oklahoma bombing case, every manufacturer of ammonium nitrate in the United States has to have a tag in it. We can do that with this industry. I've written a technical paper on that. But, I mean, that's certainly readily technically possible. If the recipes were submitted to the government, they could be tested and isotopically identified, and you could trace it to the bad guy. Well, we don't do that, and so we're badly behind the ball because of this 100 years of exempting this industry from modern industrial practice.